The market was alive with noise. Shouts, metal clanging, and the smell of cooked meat filled the air. Traders pushed heavy carts, calling out prices. Buyers moved from stall to stall, hunting for the best deal. In the center of the marketplace stood a raised wooden platform. Around it, a crowd had gathered. On the platform were cages, dozens of them. Inside the cages were alien catgirls. Their ears twitched nervously. Their long tails curled tightly around their bodies. They wore thin, torn clothes, and their big eyes darted from one face to another, searching for mercy that would never come. The auctioneer was a tall alien with a gold tooth and a cruel smile. He banged a metal rod against the platform to silence the crowd. "Fresh stock today," he shouted. "Best meat in the sector. Tender, young, and full of flavor." His voice was smooth, but his words were sharp like a knife. The buyers laughed. Some licked their lips. Others inspected the cages as if they were looking at livestock. One man even tapped the bars of a cage with his knife, making the youngest catgirl inside flinch. At the back of the crowd stood a human, Jaren. His coat was old, his boots dusty, and his pockets nearly empty. He had come here for tools and spare parts for his ship, not for this. But when he saw them, the fear in their eyes, the way they huddled together, something inside him shifted. One cage caught his attention. 3 catgirls were inside, pressed close to each other. The smallest couldn't have been more than 12. She had silver fur along her ears and a tail that trembled without pause. The oldest sat in front of her like a shield, glaring at anyone who came near. The one in the middle stared at the ground, her hands gripping her knees tightly. "Lot number 12, the auctioneer announced, pointing to that cage. 3 prime cuts for 1 lucky buyer. Let's start at 50 credits. Hands went up in the air. The bidding began. Voices overlapped, the price climbing slowly. The buyers argued, joking about who would get the first taste. Jaren felt his jaw tighten. 70 credits, someone called. 80, another shouted. Jaren's hand rose. 90. The crowd turned to look at him. A human? Buying this? Whispers spread quickly. "He can't even afford fuel," someone laughed. "Maybe he likes to eat like us," another sneered. The auctioneer's smile widened. "Ah, a human joins the game. Do I hear 100? 100, a fat alien yelled. 110, Jaren said without hesitation. Gasps came from the crowd. It wasn't a high price, but for Jaren it was nearly all he had left. The fat alien hesitated. The auctioneer banged his rod again. Going once, going twice, sold to the human. The crowd erupted in laughter and insults, calling him a fool. Jaren ignored them, walking to the platform. As he reached the cage, the 3 catgirls shrank back. Their eyes told him they didn't know if he was here to save them, or to finish what the others had started. Jaren stepped closer to the platform, his boots thudding on the dusty ground. The smell of the market was stronger here. Sweat, smoke, and the sharp scent of fear. The 3 catgirls in the cage pressed themselves against the far corner, their tails wrapped tightly around their legs. The youngest peeked at him through strands of tangled hair, then quickly hid behind the oldest again. The auctioneer grinned, showing his gold tooth. "Payment first, human," he said, his voice mocking. Jaren reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch. The coins inside clinked softly, a sound far too small for such a big risk. He tossed it to the auctioneer, who caught it, weighed it in his palm, and smirked. "Empty your pockets, you'll need every scrap for food." Someone in the crowd jeered. "He won't feed them, he'll eat them," another laughed. Jaren ignored them. His eyes never left the cage. He could see their thin arms, the marks on their wrists where ropes had once tied them. Their ears twitched at every shout from the crowd. They had learned the hard way that no voice here meant kindness. The auctioneer bent to unlock the cage. The hinges screeched. The oldest catgirl bared her small fangs, a low growl rising in her throat. The auctioneer stepped back, chuckling. "Careful, human. This one bites." "I'm not afraid," Jaren said calmly. His voice was steady, but inside, He felt the weight of what he had just done. This was more than a purchase, it was a promise. "Take them and go," the auctioneer said, waving a hand, "before someone changes their mind and makes a better offer." Jaren stepped forward. The youngest catgirl's wide eyes darted to him, and for a moment, he thought he saw hope, but it vanished just as quickly. She pressed closer to her sisters, shaking her head. "They're yours now, human," the auctioneer said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Good luck." Jaren crouched down to their level. His voice softened. "Come on. You're safe now." No one moved. The middle one stared at the floor, as if waiting for him to grab her roughly like the others always did. The oldest kept her body between him and her sisters, ready to fight even if it meant losing. Jaren didn't push. Instead, he stepped back and held out his hand, palm open. He let the silence stretch, letting them decide. From behind him, someone shouted, "Don't waste time, human. Take them before they bolt." The crowd laughed again, but Jaren stood his ground. Finally, the youngest catgirl took a small step forward. Her bare feet made no sound on the cage floor. She sniffed the air cautiously, then reached out her hand. Her small fingers brushed against his. The contact was brief, but enough. The oldest hissed low, but the youngest whispered something in a language Jaren didn't understand. Slowly, the three of them moved forward together. Jaren lifted the cage door fully open. The catgirls stepped out, their heads low, ready to flee at any sudden movement. He led them through the jeering crowd, his body shielding them from reaching hands. By the time they reached the edge of the market, the laughter had faded behind them. Ahead waited his old ship, and a future none of them could yet imagine. The walk back to Jaren's ship was long, and every step felt heavier. The market's noise faded, replaced by the echo of their quiet footsteps on the metal walkway. The three catgirls followed close, their heads lowered, eyes darting to every shadow as if danger could leap out at any moment. Jaren glanced back at them. They moved like they had learned to take up less space, to make no sound, to avoid being noticed. Even now, free from the cage, they still acted as if they were trapped. When they reached the ship, Jaren pressed his hand to the access panel. The ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics. The youngest flinched at the sound, her tail puffing slightly. The middle one froze in place, her bare feet rooted to the ground. The oldest placed a protective arm around both of them, glaring at Jaren as though warning him, "One wrong move, and I'll fight you." Jaren didn't speak. He simply stepped onto the ramp, looking back to make sure they followed. They hesitated but finally climbed up, their movements slow and cautious. Inside, the ship smelled faintly of old metal and engine grease. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and the door sealed shut behind them with a solid click. The youngest's eyes widened at the sound, then narrowed. For her, locked doors meant no escape. Jaren walked to the corner of the small cargo bay and opened a storage box. From inside, he pulled out a folded blanket and a small packet of food. He placed them on the floor, stepping back to give them space. "You can eat," he said softly. "It's safe." The youngest looked at the food, then at him but didn't move. The middle one kept her eyes down, hands clenched into fists. The oldest didn't even glance at the blanket. Her focus was fixed entirely on Jaren, studying every detail of his posture, his hands, his eyes. He could see the message in her gaze. "We've heard that before." Minutes passed in heavy silence. The ship's hum was the only sound. Jaren didn't push them. Instead, he went to the cockpit and began checking the controls. Through the reflection in the glass, he saw the youngest slowly crawl toward the packet of food. She sniffed it, touched it with her fingers, then quickly pulled back as if expecting it to explode. The oldest said something sharp in their language, and the youngest froze again. Jaren didn't need to understand the words. He knew it meant caution. He leaned back in his chair. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, more to himself than to them. Outside, the spaceport lights flickered. Somewhere far away, a storm was forming. The sound of distant thunder rolled through the walls of the ship. The youngest's ears twitched. She glanced toward the sound, then toward Jaren. For a moment, her eyes softened, but she quickly hid her face again. The silence between them was unbroken, but something had shifted. It was small, fragile, and uncertain. Trust wasn't here yet. But maybe, just maybe, it had taken its first step toward them. Night fell over the spaceport, and the storm finally reached them. Rain pounded against the metal roof of the hangar, each drop echoing through the ship's hull. The wind howled outside, rattling loose panels and sending a chill through the air. In the cargo bay, the three catgirls sat huddled together under the dim yellow light. The youngest shivered, her ears drooping low. The middle one kept glancing toward the sealed door as if expecting someone to break in. The oldest stayed tense, her eyes never leaving Jaren, who sat a short distance away on the floor, repairing a loose wire from one of the panels. A sudden leak dripped water from above, splashing right near their blanket. The youngest let out a small gasp and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Jaren noticed, set down his tools, and stood up. Without a word, he grabbed an old tarp from a storage locker and walked toward them. The oldest tensed immediately, her tail flicking sharply. But Jaren simply draped the tarp over the blanket, making sure the leak couldn't touch them again. The youngest peeked up at him, her big eyes following his movements. She hesitated, then reached a tiny hand out from beneath the blanket, just enough to brush the edge of his sleeve. Jaren froze, not wanting to scare her away. He didn't move his arm, letting her fingers rest there for a moment. Her touch was light, trembling, but there was no fear in it, only curiosity. The middle one whispered something in their language. The youngest quickly pulled her hand back, ducking behind her sisters again. Jaren gave a small nod, as if to say he understood, then returned to his seat without pressing further. The storm outside grew worse. The wind howled so loudly it almost sounded like voices. Somewhere in the distance, a loud crash echoed, a storage container toppling in the yard. The youngest flinched at the noise, her tail puffing out. Jaren glanced toward the sealed hatch. His instincts told him trouble was brewing. Through the narrow cockpit window, he saw shadows moving in the rain, figures slipping between crates. His jaw tightened. He knew those movements, they belonged to the traders from the market. Inside the ship, the oldest must have sensed it too. Her ears twitched, and her tail stiffened. She didn't speak, but her body shifted so that she was slightly in front of her sisters. Jaren quietly stood and walked toward the cockpit controls. "Stay here," he said softly, though he doubted they understood the words. The youngest's eyes followed him, wide and searching. There was something new in them now. Not just fear, but a spark of belief that maybe he wouldn't leave them behind. As he powered up the engines, the hum filled the ship, warm and steady against the sound of the storm. He glanced back one last time. The youngest was still watching him, her tiny hands gripping the edge of the blanket. For the first time since he met them, she gave the smallest nod. It wasn't much, but in that silent exchange, trust had taken root. The storm outside roared like a wild beast, but even through the pounding rain, Jaren heard something else. Footsteps. Quick, heavy, and coming closer. He didn't need to look to know who it was. The traders. He moved to the cockpit window and spotted them through the sheets of rain. 4 of them, wearing dark coats that flapped in the wind, weapons glinting under the dim port lights. They stayed low, weaving between cargo crates, heading straight for his ship. Jaren's hand went to the blaster on his belt. He didn't want to fight, but he wasn't going to let anyone take the catgirls. Not now. Not ever. In the cargo bay, the oldest catgirl sensed the danger. Her ears twitched sharply, and she stood, placing herself fully in front of her sisters. The youngest clutched the blanket tightly, eyes wide and trembling. The middle one grabbed her hand, trying to keep her still, but her own tail was puffed with fear. The sound of boots splashing through puddles grew louder. Then bang! Something hit the side of the ship. The youngest let out a sharp gasp. Jaren shouted over his shoulder, "Stay down!" He moved to the ramp controls and locked it tight, but he knew they could cut through if they wanted. The storm gave them cover, and the spaceport security didn't care enough to intervene. A loud metallic clang echoed from the rear hatch. They were trying to force it open. Jaren ducked behind a crate, blaster ready. The moment the hatch creaked open, a shadow stepped inside, blaster raised. Without hesitation, Jaren fired. The shot hit the metal beside the intruder's head, sending sparks flying. The traitor cursed and ducked back outside, but another moved in from the side. The oldest cat girl let out a sudden, piercing hiss, loud enough to make the traitor flinch for just a second. That was all Jaren needed. He lunged forward, slamming the man against the wall and twisting the weapon from his grip. Two more shadows appeared in the hatch, rain pouring in around them. Jaren fired twice, hitting one in the leg. The other stumbled back into the storm. The youngest whimpered, hiding her face against her sister's arm. The middle one pulled her close, whispering something fast and fearful in their own language. Jaren's chest rose and fell sharply. The attackers outside shouted to each other, but the storm was swallowing their words. He knew they'd try again soon. Without wasting time, he sprinted to the cockpit and powered the engines to full. The ship rumbled, lights flickering as the turbines spun up. Outside, the traitors were already moving toward the front. Jaren slammed the controls forward. The ship jerked hard, lifting from the ground with a roar. Rain streaked across the glass as they shot into the dark sky. Below, the traitors grew smaller and smaller until the storm swallowed them completely. In the cargo bay, the three catgirls sat huddled together, their eyes fixed on the man who had just risked everything to keep them safe. The youngest's tail was still trembling, but now her gaze held something new, not just fear, something closer to hope. The storm was left far behind, swallowed by the blackness of space. The ship's engines hummed softly now, a steady rhythm that filled the silence. The stars stretched endlessly in every direction, glowing like distant lanterns. Jaren sat in the pilot's chair, his eyes fixed on the navigation screen. His hands were steady on the controls, but his mind was still in the spaceport, on the traitors' faces, their greed, their anger. He knew they wouldn't forget this. Behind him, the cargo bay was quiet. The three catgirls sat close together, still wrapped in the blanket. The youngest peeked over the edge of it every now and then, her big eyes darting to Jaren, then quickly away. The middle one sat with her knees pulled up, her tail curled neatly around her ankles. The oldest remained alert, her gaze sharp, watching every movement he made. After a while, Jaren stood and walked to them. The youngest stiffened, her ears twitching nervously, but he didn't come too close. He knelt a short distance away, setting down a small tray of food and a bottle of clean water. "You should eat," he said quietly. "It's safe." The three of them didn't move. Jaren sighed, running a hand through his hair. He understood words alone couldn't undo the years of fear they had lived through. He pushed the tray a little closer, then stood and took a step back, giving them space. Minutes passed. Finally, the youngest reached out with hesitant fingers, picking up a small piece of bread. She sniffed it first, then took a tiny bite. When nothing bad happened, she chewed slowly, her tail flicking once in relief. The middle one took the bread from her and examined it before breaking it in half and handing a piece back to her sister. Even in fear, they shared everything. The oldest didn't touch the food yet. Her eyes were still on Jaren, as if waiting for a trick. Jaren sat back down in the pilot's seat but kept his body turned toward them. "Why save us?" a soft voice said suddenly. He froze. The words were broken, the accent heavy, but they were in human standard. His eyes went to the middle catgirl. She was staring at him now, her voice quiet but steady. Jaren didn't answer right away. He thought about the marketplace, the laughter, the smell of fear in the air. He thought about the way their eyes had looked in that cage. Finally, he said, "Because no one else would." The middle one tilted her head slightly, as if weighing his words. The youngest chewed slowly, her ears lifting just a little higher. The oldest still didn't speak, but for the first time, her shoulders eased, just slightly. The hum of the ship filled the silence again. Outside, the stars kept passing by, endless and free. Inside, for the first time since they met, the air felt a little warmer. They weren't safe forever, not yet. But for now, they were away from cages, away from the market, and heading toward something better. 3 days passed since they left the spaceport. The journey had been quiet, with only the soft hum of the ship and the occasional beeping of the navigation system. Jaren kept his course locked on a small, uncharted green planet far from trade routes. It wasn't rich. It wasn't famous. But it was safe. The 3 catgirls slowly began to move more freely around the ship. The youngest sometimes wandered into the cockpit, her curious eyes studying every button and lever. The middle one spent time by the small window in the cargo bay, watching the stars as if she could memorize every one of them. The oldest still kept her guard up, but she no longer flinched when Jaren walked past. When the planet finally appeared in the viewport, it looked like a jewel against the blackness of space. Deep green forests, blue lakes, and sunlight spilling across the surface. Jaren spoke over his shoulder. "We're here." The youngest's ears perked. The middle one leaned closer to the glass. Even the oldest stepped forward, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. The ship descended through the clouds, the air outside shifting from black to gold as sunlight broke through. Below, endless meadows stretched out, dotted with flowers. Forests whispered in the breeze, and rivers glimmered like silver threads. Jaren landed near a small clearing by a lake. When the ramp lowered, fresh air rushed inside, carrying the scent of grass and water. The youngest gasped softly and stepped forward, her bare feet touching real ground for the first time in years. The middle one followed, kneeling to press her hands into the soft soil as if to make sure it was real. The oldest stayed at the top of the ramp for a moment, scanning the area before finally stepping down. Jaren unloaded a few supplies from the ship, food, blankets, tools. "This place is yours now," he said simply. The youngest ran into the meadow, chasing butterflies with a laugh so light it startled even her sisters. The middle one walked slowly toward the lake, her reflection shimmering on the water's surface. The oldest stood beside Jaren, silent for a long moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but steady. "We are not meat," she said, her eyes locked on his. "We are yours." Jaren didn't smile right away. He just nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Then, finally, a small smile formed. "No," he said softly. "You're free." For the first time, her tail swayed gently, not in warning, but in peace. The sun dipped lower, painting the meadow in warm light. The lake rippled gently, carrying the sound of the youngest's laughter across the clearing. Jaren looked out over the quiet, untouched land. He had spent his last credits on them, given up what little he had left, but watching them step into the sunlight, he knew he had gained something priceless, something worth more than all the credits in the galaxy.